So what did you miss at Jubilee today? Well, you missed quite a gathering. We had friends from far and wide visit us, folks we haven't seen in a while. And well, we tackled some tough stuff today. We wondered why it's so hard sometimes to see God. We reflected on the passage in John where the Greeks arrive and say, we wish to see Jesus. And we recognize their desire as well as ours. But we also recognize the difficulty in that. We all like to see Jesus as a baby in a manger. We love to see the gentle shepherd. We even like to see that guy having lunch with Zacchaeus and others, perhaps undesirables. We like that Jesus. But sometimes we also have to look for and see Jesus in pain and struggle. And as Jesus points out in the John Gospel, in his death. And not just the fact of his death, but the manner of his death. And so we acknowledge that sometimes maybe we don't really want to see Jesus. We just want happy times. And we assume that, well, seeing Jesus means we'll be surrounded by happy times. But that's not always how it works. We acknowledge that sometimes it's hard to find God, to see Jesus when we read the newspaper and we are inundated with what's going on in the Ukraine, with what's happening in Syria, what's happening in Nigeria, in the Middle East, in Iraq, even in our own communities, when gunshots are becoming all too familiar, and gunshot deaths no longer shock and stun us. It's hard to see God. We want to see Jesus, but it's difficult until we recognize Jesus' presence in the struggle, in the suffering, and in the pain, and when we dare to open our eyes and bring ourselves into those situations and not hide from them. We reflected on the prophet Jeremiah, who reminds us of a new covenant that God makes with us, one that is written on our hearts. And so we realize that as much as we like to look outside for signs of Jesus, for signs of God, sometimes we also have to look inside and recognize that God can also be indwelling. And that being the case, sometimes we're called on to convey God's presence. So we are invited to walk into those difficult places, those hospital rooms, those homes that know grief, those lives that are confused and hurting. We're invited to go in and look for God's presence and also to be God's presence. Sir, we wish to see Jesus. Well, then open your eyes. Open your heart. Look inside. And recognize that God's promise is real. God's covenant is not forgotten by God. God promises to be with us so powerfully, so intimately that God's covenant is written on our hearts. So powerfully, so intimately that God's presence is in our midst. In Jesus Christ, in our human condition. We went on later in the service to pray, to sing and to pray, send us, Jesus. And we prayed to God, asking God, in the midst of our turmoil and our difficulty, to send us Jesus, to give us comfort and direction. And also, we changed that prayer in our last verse as we recognize that we too have hands, we too have hearts, we too have abilities, we too have the ability to share love. And so looking out into the world, we ask, send us, Jesus. Put us in, Coach. We're ready. And we went out into the world ready. And we also, at the very end of our gathering today, had a moment to celebrate that our intern, Etienne Lesage, has been called to a congregation in Stony Creek, not far from us. And so we were able to live authentically the response to send us Jesus. Jesus sends Etienne out into the world, and we celebrate that. And we thank God for having sent us Etienne. Anyway, that's more than you need to know, but that's what we did today. That's what you missed at Jubilee, and hopefully we won't miss you next week. God bless.